when they started out, but it immediately turned into this is for a natural disaster, a tornado, flood, or any act of bioterrorism, or a nationally declared emergency. And so I lit up to that one, and the spokesperson there was from the state FEMA office, who also was the trainer for pastors in their training program for pastors, training program for pastors. He said, your job, pastors, is to get to your congregations and preach to them Romans 13. And that's the part that says you obey the higher powers. And he was saying you have to teach them to obey their government. You have to teach them to obey their government. You have to teach them to obey their government.
The Bible teaches that we are to obey our God-given authority. That's what God said. And they say, hey, you got to put a mask on. I'm just going to put the mask on.
If I were in your situation, I would just take the COVID vaccine. I'm not willing to die for that. You know what? I'm not going to judge you for getting it. The Bible doesn't specifically say one way or the other.
I'm just going to put the mask on.
By the way, Hitler did that. He had a cohort of preachers that preached Romans 13 out of context.
Yes, he did. And this is what he wanted us to do. And so he's telling us that. He's telling us, and the thing that really got us started on this, and when I started contacting people, is when he said the problem with local enforcement of a federal or state mandate that is quarantine or relocation, and these are the terms he used, or a declaration of martial law based on whatever disaster it might be.
He said martial law. Let's be clear.
Yes, he did. And he said if it goes the distance, the problem is all along the way is this so-called cowboy mentality. And you pastors are going to have to learn to quell that cowboy mentality.
And they say, hey, you got to put a mask on. I'm just going to put the mask on.
If I were in your situation, I would just take the COVID vaccine. I'm not willing to die for that. You know what? I'm not going to judge you for getting it. The Bible doesn't specifically say one way or the other.
I'm just going to put the mask on.
And so I asked him what he meant. He said, the individualistic effort that stands up and said, this is my property, you'll pry guns from my cold dead hand kind of thing. He said, the individualistic effort that stands up and said, this is my property, you'll...
Private property, I own land, it's my land, you can't take it from me, I'm going to pass it down from generation to generation, it's going to be our land. That is an American concept, but that is not a biblical concept. And here's all I'm saying, we as American Christians need to realize that sometimes you say, well, you want me to give up my land? When you are pushing and promoting the idea of private property, just realize you're pushing an American concept, not a biblical concept. Land ownership, as you and I know it, is an American concept, but it is not a biblical concept. And here's all I'm trying to tell you, and here's all you need to understand, God's not an American. God does not submit himself to the ideas. And I realize people are going to say, oh, you're a communist. Private property, that's what protects us from communism. You know what God's not an American. You say, well, what do you mean? Land ownership, a family farm, the land that I'm going to pass down to my children from generation to generation. Bless God, I'm so American. It's not. You didn't get that from the Bible. That's American. But God's not an American. Bible-believing, conservative, patriotic, apple pie eating, America loving.
And so I asked him what he meant. He said, the individualistic effort that stands up and said, this is my property, you'll pry guns from my cold dead hand kind of thing. And everybody laughed. There were only about 6 people there. And he said, we're talking about law enforcement. That's a law enforcement issue. We're talking about you pastors going there because you know the people, you all are trusted, and you'll be preaching this ahead of time. You can stand in the neighborhoods and tell people this is for their own good. This will
Got to stop you. You would have been preaching this ahead of time. Folks, this means they're going with it. This is happening nationwide. We know there's this FEMA preacher leadership program going on. We know we've talked to other preachers now since Butch Paul broke this a few months ago with you, Pastor. This is real, folks. This is so evil. Please continue.
This is deadly real. And that was our first meeting. The second meeting pretty much carried it through.